Hey guys, it's Maymay, and today we're going to make 3 embellishments using some different techniques of embossing and stamping and things like that. And none of this is like groundbreaking and my idea. These have been done forever, but I just thought I would show you how to mix them together with your stamp sets and give you some inspiration. We're going to do a second generation stamp with embossing in front. We're going to do a straight stamp, just a regular stamp with embossing in front, and then we're going to double emboss. This guy is embossed twice, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's get started. Let's start with this guy first. So I'm going to be using 2 stamp sets from my stamp line today. The one called Anchored, which is this one, and the one called Define Emotions, which is this one. I think these are really cool together, and they can be real masculine, as a matter of fact. I've got the Anchor loaded up on my block, and I've got some Memento Nautical Blue ink. I'm going to ink this little guy up, and you're going to need some scrap paper at first because we're going to ink off and then ink onto our project. Matter of fact, whenever you say second generation stamping, that's basically what it means. You're going to ink it one time on one paper and then ink it again on your actual project. So now that I let that sit, let me ink that one more time. Get it good and inked. Stamp it once. And then I'm going to come to my project and I'm actually going to stamp it and let it sit there for a few minutes and let what's left on that block transfer. Now I can see from this one that I left some ink on the block, so I'm probably going to have a dark spot, but I'm not going to stress about that because it'll be fine. So see, it's a little lighter this time than that first one, which I think is super cool. Now then, I'm going to let this dry for just a second. I mean, literally just a second because this ink dries really quick. And we're going to prep for embossing. Now, this is important, and I forget it all the time, but for what we're doing today, you cannot forget this. If you were to try to stamp your image here with your VersaFine ink or your Versamark ink and then put your embossing powder on it, if any of this was still wet, your embossing powder would stick to that anchor as well. Now, this is going to go for everything we're doing today. You got to have either an anti-static pad like this, or you can have the powder tool, or some people have even rubbed dryer sheets over them to kind of get the static off. So I've seen that done too. This is just a little anti-powder tool. I picked this up from my friend Edith at Scrapbooking with Me. I got it when I was at a retreat with her, and I'm trying to remember to use it. Today I have to, because if I forget, it'll be a mess. Now this is Versamark ink. I get a lot of questions about embossing. This is the one. It's one of the ones. A lot of companies are making these now. This is the one I use. It's just the one I've had forever. It's a watermark stamp pad, so it stays wet for a good long time. I'm going to show you how to do this with another ink in a few minutes, but for now we're going to use this one. So then I'm just going to stamp right over my original image, and I want you to notice that you can't see a thing because it's a clear watermark ink that we just did that with. So it's sitting there and it's going to stay wet for us for a little bit. See that powder residue? Oh my, I don't know if you can see it in the screen. I can't see it when I look up there, but that's the powder from that bag that is left behind. This is that scrap paper that we inked off on. And now I'm going to put some embossing powder. I think I'm going to use the silver. I did the gold on this one, so let's do the silver. This embossing powder is from Ranger, and this is just silver embossing powder is what it says here. I've had it in my stash forever, and that's one good thing. It looks like I'm using a lot, but I'm using very little embossing powder because most of that is going to go right back in our container here. So I'm just thumping off the excess, and you can see it doesn't look very shiny or very pretty right now, but it will. Okay, I'm going to take this excess and put it back into my jar. And the way I do that is I just take my paper and roll it toward the center and just kind of funnel it back in. Now, you will not be able to get all of that embossing powder off of your paper, so don't use this one for another color. If you're going to change to a different color like I am, use a different sheet because there's still residue and you don't want to mix your colors, especially if you're using white or something like that. Now you can do some mixing and get some super fun kind of homemade embossing colors if you like, but that's not what today's about. Now for a heat tool, this is the one I use. It's the Marvy heat tool. I picked this up on Amazon. I think I got it for like $13, but I really, really like it. And it was a recommendation from my friend Christopher at Brutus Monroe, so I love it. I'm going to turn it on and let it preheat. This is the thing. When you heat emboss, your paper's going to warp because you're adding heat to it. One way to avoid some of that warp is to preheat your gun so you're not sitting here forever putting heat to your paper. So I'm going to turn it on and let it start to heat up. and only for a few seconds. And now that it's hot, I'm going to take it right to the project and I'm going to heat that ink. Now what I like to do is start the heat on the front, add a little to the back. It also helps with the warp. I kind of go back and forth until I get a good emboss. Back and front. And I just, for some reason, this will help you with the warp, kind of adding heat to both sides evenly. Now check that out. It is embossed, and see the shimmer or the shine? Isn't that beautiful on there? Very subtle, very light. And in a minute, we will punch this out with our die and make it look like an element for a card. All right, so there is second generation. Now let's look at just plain old stamping. So I've got another piece here, another piece of white. I'm going to go back to that stamp, and I think this time I'll use some black ink. Let me locate, here it is. Here's my VersaFine ink. And I think this will be fun to do. So I'm just going to ink my stamp up again. This time I'm not doing the second generation. I'm just actually going to stamp straight onto my page here. These are just scraps of white cardstock. I keep all of my, especially my white scraps, because I use them over and over. So there's our anchor. And I think on top of this, we'll do some gold. I think that'll be pretty. This is a very subtle look when you're using the full stamp. It's not going to be real bold, okay? I think I'll change my sentiment out as well. I'm going to go in and put my scrap paper behind it just to get us started. I'm letting that dry. This is VersaFine ink, and it really needs to dry. This is the one that's really, really rich and thick, and it will stay wet for a good long time. So I'm really letting this one dry before I add my anti-static pad to it. But that is the purpose behind this. And I'm patting this on first before I rub. So I just want to get it on there real good. And what this does, it does a couple things. It puts down that little coating of powder to get rid of the static, but it also takes any grease from your fingerprints or anything away so that nothing but your watermark ink will stick. I'm going to use the Sentiment Courage this time. I'm going to ink that up. And just so you know, I carry this ink in my store, the ones I'm using today for the, almost everything. And so if you're interested, you can get a link to that below. And this guy comes in a 1-inch cube. So if you're interested in maybe just trying out this ink in the 1-inch, that'll take you a long way for a long time. So if you want to try it, check it out. I'm going to use some gold. This is from Brutus Monroe, and it's called Gilded, and I love this color. Let me show you what this looks like. I'm just going to pour that onto my sentiment that I just stamped and tap off any excess. I even like to take this away and blow away any excess as well. And by using that anti-static pad, it's only going to stick to our sentiment and not to our anchor. Now, if for some reason it does stick to your anchor, you can use a, let me put this back in the jar. You can use a little paintbrush and kind of knock off any that's in a place where it shouldn't be. Back to the heat tool and we'll emboss it. And now you can see we have that courage word embossed right over the top. I love that look. So that's two. Now let's do one more, and I think this is my favorite. It's the double embossing. So let's work on that one. Now for this double embossing, I want to show you what I've done. I've taken a piece of black cardstock and I've treated it with my anti-static powder bag. I don't want any static anywhere, okay? And I'm going to use some alabaster pigment ink. This is from Brutus Monroe, and I just happen to love it. I love the size of this ink container. And I'm going to ink up that anchor with this pigment ink. Now, pigment ink stays wetter longer, so we can emboss on top of pigment ink, unlike dye ink, which dries really quick. So I'm going to stamp this into place. Make sure I get a good image. Lift that up, and you can see that white ink there. It's beautiful, isn't it? But I'm going to emboss it with white as well, which makes this really white. So check this out. I'm going to get our scrap paper out. This is some alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. So it's the same color as the ink we just put down. And I'm going to pour this on top of our anchor image as well. And then we'll tap off the excess. And we're going to get a really white anchor because we've doubled up white ink with white embossing on the black paper. It's going to be beautiful. Now that is heat embossed, and I'm just gonna, while it's warm, kind of make that paper flat again. I did not spend a whole lot of time. I just melted the embossing and stopped. I don't want to overcook it, if that makes sense, because we're going to do this as a double emboss. So we're going to add heat again. I'm going to use that same courage sentiment, and I'm going to just, this one should be dry, but let it cool to make sure. And I'm going to re-anti-static it, because with the, the heat tool, we kind of blowed some of that off, and I want to make sure we don't have any embossing powder where we don't want it. So we've embossed the anchor. Now we're going to stamp the sentiment on top with Versamark, and we're going to emboss again. So I'm going to use courage, just like so. And then I think on this one, we're going to use the gold from Brutus Monroe, and bring some scratch paper over. Pour on the gold. Now I've done this double embossing with lots of different things. You just have to be careful not to overheat. That's the biggest thing. Like the second time you come in, you just want to do this until it melts. You don't want to spend too much time on it, which you really want to do that all the time anyway, because you can overheat embossing powder, and when you do, you'll know it. It won't be like, oh, did I? No, you'll know. You'll be able to tell it doesn't look as shiny as you want, or it doesn't look as clean and crisp, so you'll be able to tell. All right, so I'm going to get some of this off of my work surface before I heat this, so I don't emboss my work surface. Then I'm going to let that sit there and cool for a second. And because I didn't overheat that anchor the first time, it could handle the heat the second time. Just be kind of gentle with it. Just don't overdo it. And look at this. Ready for this? Can you see that shimmer? That shine? So pretty, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these guys to my die cut machine, and I'm going to cut them out and make them embellishments for cards. Now here you can see I have my Cuttlebug out, and I have my cutting platform set up. I have an A plate. I have the magnetic cutting plate from Cricut underneath there, a B plate, and then my paper. And this is my die, which I'm going to lay on top. And because that's a magnetic plate, it'll help me get this lined up just right. And then I'm going to place a B plate on top of that. Now these are the extended cutting plates. That's what is recommended for this magnetic platform, because it is a longer one. It's extended. A lot of folks have asked me how to get this magnetic cutting plate. The only place I have seen it available is on HSN, and it has been sold out. So you may have to wait for it to come back, but just keep checking HSN. I love this magnetic cutting plate. So once we do this, I can lift this guy up, and there it is. Now, if you want to see a video on how to use the cutting plate, I have a video for that. I'll link it here for you. But I'm going to do this die cut to all three of our anchors. If I had that circle die more, like if I had more of this size circle die, I could do all of them at one time, but only have one, so this is how I'm going to do it. Now what I've done, I've cut all our anchors out with the die, and I've cut some other circles to go behind. These guys are barely larger, and this one's a good bit larger. So I want to show you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to glue these straight down onto a backer, but you could use some foam tape and pop these guys up, whatever you needed for your project. But I think this is so pretty, and a pretty way to show off all of that embossing that we did. So get that one glued down, and then this one. This guy, because it's not a whole lot bigger than our first die cut, you're just going to get barely an edge of those little circles showing, and that, I think that looks cool, especially with this black and white. It makes that white really pop. So just line that up, and see how we just get that barely little edge. I love that. Very nautical looking to me. I don't know why, but it seems very nautical. And I did the same cut for this one. It's just barely going to peek out that red. Maybe it reminds me of a life preserver. I don't know. It just seems very nautical. Now these pages are going to feel very warped. Don't feel bad about moving them around, especially while you have the glue on them, while they're the paper's kind of wet. Move them around, get them into shape so that they'll be nice and flat. And then when you put them on your project, when you adhere them down, they'll be flat again. So there you go, guys. That's the 3 techniques that I told you we would talk about today. Second generation, double embossing, and just embossing on top of stamping. Can you imagine how many places you can use this? I cannot wait to see what you guys do with it. If you do any of these or any projects that you're making, we want to see them over on our Facebook group, which is called Maymay Made It, and so did I. Check us out over there, join the group, and share with us the projects you're making. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Maymay Made It, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Snapchat, on Periscope, on Huzza, you name it, we're there. Go check us out. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.